Hey everybody, it's Hellfire. Welcome back to another This Week in WiXoss, your source for English and Japanese news for WiXoss. Now, I know this video is a little bit late. I'm sorry. I was out of town on vacation, so not only did coming back throw off of my timing for when this needed to be recorded, it just threw me out of whack entirely, so I apologize for this being late, but that is fine. It is a light week in terms of news anyways. So what we will be covering this week for the English side of the game, we have sample decks for P12, posted by Takara. Now we're about, I want to say 2 to 3 weeks in Dissonance meta at this point. I'm pretty sure most people have their lists solidified at this point. I know looking at these decks, I almost thought these were my lists to begin with because they looked oddly familiar to mine, but it still doesn't hurt to look through what Takara has to say about the set and what they would build as well. And for the Japanese side of the game, we've got nothing. It's a bit of a dead period right now since P24 did just release a couple weeks ago, or WX24 P1 released a couple weeks ago, and they're pushing that, so it's a bit of a slow period there. They might have sample deck lists, but that will probably be next week's video, as I need to do a little more research on those for if they exist in the first place. If not, I'll try to have some sample decks for the new Japanese set available to give an idea what Japan's been cooking with, or maybe just look at their tournament results. Let me know what you guys would want to see out of the two, if we want to see like what Japan has tournament results wise, or see what fellow players have cooked for their sample lists on the Takara Japanese site. But before we get into our sample decks for the English side of the game, I've got hints for the, I want to say 2 or 3 videos ago, it's been a bit, for the Crush My Board segment. Now, if you remember from this one, our opponent has potential Madoka Dub and a Madoka Clap, and our hand seems to be a whole lot of spells, or trash seems to be a whole lot of spells, and yeah, it's kind of rough looking, but it's possible, and I've got some hints to help you out if you're still stuck on that puzzle. So hints-wise, have any chance of dealing damage through a potential Madoka Clap, you need to have at least one open lane. Removing a Signy should take priority over drawing any form of card, because we can find a way to get Signy onto the field later. Our end goal should at least be one open lane and one Signy that can swinging with S Lancer, because opening more than one hole will give our opponent enough enter for Madoka Clap, but at the same time you have to present 2 lethal swings to get past a Madoka Dub. Osagitsune and Parajulie isn't an option since it appears we are unable to get Signy onto her hand without exceeding 7, which will cut off our ability to enter charge. And last but not least, consider timing rules. When we remove a Signy, both Tamas will trigger, unless one of them is blanked. But they do both trigger separately, and it is the opponent's, and it is our turn at this point. So is there anything that can be done in between those triggers on those Tamas? So with those hints out of the way, and hopefully they're helpful enough for people to solve the puzzle, and if you're unsure what the puzzle is and your first time checking out these videos, I'll link the video that this puzzle is mentioned in the description below with the timestamp started. But let's go on to the English news. Like I said, we've got 5 sample deck lists that we are looking at today, one for each of the new centers for Yuki, Hanyo, Miko, Mel, and Tama. I'm going to go over some of the key cards for each of these decks and some of their strengths and weaknesses. So we're going to start things off here with the Yuki deck. So we see on this deck list here, we got 4 Nova, 4 Wild Wolves, 2 Guillotines, 2 Donna Dissonas, 2 Tamago Dissonas, 2 Bang Dissona. I do not remember. I do not remember the name. I think that's Yukime Dissona, actually. I don't remember the name of that Signy off the top of my head. It is Yukime Dissona. Yeah, it is Yukime Dissona. For our non-burst Signy, and for our bursting, we got Matcha Frap, Moving Picture, Servants. Obviously, we run 4 of those. 2 Yuka Yukas, 2 Ot Dissonas, and 4 Connect Dissonas. Now, some notable cards for this deck list is Connect Dissona. Connect Dissona being Yuki's partner Signy here. Definitely want to see as many of those as possible because it really does complement her. It really does complement Yuki's once basically beginning of attack auto. Since you can basically clear off the opponent's entire field with 2 of these and Yuki out on the field. Not to mention the power boost from Connect Dissona really helps out with this deck's defensive capabilities. Donna Dissona as well. Donna plays really nice into the gameplay as well because it will give you 2 Larig attacks, and you can mostly forego attacking with your Signy unless it's in like an open lane or something like that. You don't have to worry about giving your opponent resources in that regard. And the last one being Wawolf Dissona. One thing about Yuki is her deck tends to be really defensive, so Wawolf gives a really nice aggressive push at level 1 with the Lancer. With the Lancer, so long as the thing facing her is level 1. So some strength of this deck, as I mentioned before, is the resource denial between the combination of Yuki, Savage Miko, and Connect Dissona, and probably the freest removal in the game. Granted, the connects have to live cross-turn, but you do at least get 1 free removal per game, or per turn, on the deck itself. And another strength, that I didn't mention this on the slide, is it is probably the most defensive deck in the set, because or at least this list is the most defensive deck in the set, because not only do you have Sunspot Memory, Yuki's once per game also gives you extra defensive capabilities, so you're almost playing with 10 life cloth at this point between Sunspot Memory and Yuki's once per game. I'm going to put a quotations around 10 life cloth. Barriers don't really work as life cloth since there are ways to get around these, but it is still pretty annoying to have to deal with. Downside of this deck is, at least this specific deck, not in general, is it's the slowest in the Dissona meta. It isn't... a lot of Dissona meta is very much a make 3 hole, swing 3 Signy in Larig and try and rush your opponent down. We see this a lot with like Firecrackers and Wawolves, especially in Hanyo. Hanyo being probably the most aggressive, and we'll get to that later. And this deck has and the other weakness of this deck specifically is it has a very low blue count, which could potentially pose an issue with Madoka Clap. I don't think it's going to be that much of an issue. I mean, we only have 6 true blue Signy in here. Servants can help, but you really want those in your hand more than anything. The blue account might actually pose to be an issue in this regards. But other than that, like it seems to be this list seems to be pretty solid on its own. I probably wouldn't even bother with blue at this point. I probably would just put in a if this were my list, I probably wouldn't even bother with blue at this point. I probably would just put honestly, I could see red in for Firecrackers to be a little more aggressive at level 1, but that's just me. Going on to Hanyo's deck. So Hanyo, We see we've got 2 Rill Dissonas, 4 Firecrackers, 2 Maho Maho, 4 Ivies, 4 Yuzuki Yuzuki Dissonas, 2 Bang Dissonas, 4 Orzovs, or 2 Orzovs for non-burst. On to burst, we got 4 Opening Signal, 4 Emergence, 4 Servant, 4 Lallaroo Dissona, and 4 Sea Glove. It's almost my favorite kind of build, is 10 4-ofs until we look at the Rill, Maho Maho, Bang, and Orzil. So the notable cards, obviously, for all of these, the partner Signy is going to be the best with, in this case, it will be Sea Glove. Sea Glove Dissona, it complements the... there isn't really much on Hanyo it complements, but it is a mini Entwined Supremacy in its own sense. Because since we do have Hanyo's beginning of attack phase action, or beginning of attack phase auto to assign Assassin or Double Crush, you can assign Assassin to this and basically tell your opponent they have to pay 1 in order to activate that burst in general. And it's doubly so with if you give it Double Crush, because, well, now they have to pay 1 for each life burst that they want to activate. Because you notice it's not limited to a once per turn, so for each life burst you would see on the Double Crush, they must pay 1 for each of those bursts. Lallaroo Dissona plays really well into the fact that this deck runs 8 spells, and all these spells are extremely powerful, and being into a more open color-wise format where you can run stuff that is off color without worrying. Being able to target out non-center colored enter is extremely strong, especially in cases like your opponent's not on a blue center and they're using Madoka. You can rip the blue out for a Madoka Clap, or like Lion, for example, you can rip out the white if your opponent's not on the white center. Being able to have targeted enter removal is nice. And then lastly, Opening Signal. Opening Signal, just a delayed, in general, is just a delayed, what's the no limit spell? What is it? Deafening Inferno. There we go. So you can set this up and force some really funny game plans. Like, for example, you attach it to a Firecracker, and you attach it to a Firecracker that's in front of a 12k, and then you put your Sea Glove in front of a 10k or less. You attack with Firecracker first, kill the thing in front of the Sea Glove, and now your Sea Glove that you gave Double Crush to the same turn now has a free lane. So it creates great combat math and figuring out how much damage you potentially have on your opponent's end. It also creates a really versatile game plan with Hanyo's auto. So some of the strengths of this deck, and I've touched on this already a little bit, is modal damage selection. Biggest one being attached to, Hanyo being able to assign Assassin or Double Crush. And has probably some of the best and cheapest removal in the set. Opening Signals, Yuzuki Memorias, Firecrackers all attribute to this. Bang and Rill aren't really that, cheap, but through Ivy and Emergence, it isn't as bad. It's actually a great way to cover those costs just a little bit. Downside of this deck, though, is it really can't handle discard that well. There isn't really, or this specific build, there isn't really any way to regain your hand against discard matchups, so you'll be floundering around a little bit on that. And the piece lineup to this is very expensive, considering if we go to the top, cost 3, Unbalanced Dance cost 2, so there's 5 in its own right. And when you're considering that you also have your auto that you would like to probably use once per turn, and our Multi-stop assist Machina Bind costs a whopping 6 for all nodes. You got a pretty expensive Lyric deck, so being able to use a lot of these abilities might prove to be just a bit difficult. So you have to be very conservative on your enter in this regard, or space out. Try to space out it as much as possible. Honestly, at least with this lineup. And this is also just my personal list with Hanyo. If I were to do any changes, I would remove the black entirely, including assists, and replace it with blue options like Tamago to give a little card draw. And honestly, Eldora. Eldora's assists actually do play really nice into some of the bursts here, because now your opening signal and your emergence can now stop 2 lanes in one burst, for example. So like if your opponent opens 3, I'm going to use emergence as an example here because this actually happened while I was on vacation. Starford, if you're watching this is still a funny moment from that entire thing. If you have Eldora on stage out, I believe that's the level 2, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you have the Eldora level 2 that gives the first and second life cloth in your check zone down or draw 2, emergence basically becomes a like draw 2, stop 2, depending on what's in your enter zone, right? So there's that. Or if you have opening signal, for example, opening signal now becomes a stop 2 because you can vanish a target up and then down the other in general, and then you can opt to take the second damage to just draw 2 cards and rebuild your hand from discard in that regard. But other than that, like, this list isn't that terrible. It's actually like really close to my list in that regards. I just run blue and green in my Lyric deck versus white and black, but you could probably just set out the black for blue here and still stay on the same pieces if you want. Keyword if. But other than that, it's not that bad of a list. So let's just move on to Miko's list now. So Miko, we've got 2 Nova in the main deck, 4 Pond Turtle, 4 Musica, 2 Guillotine, 4 Donna, 2 Alos Purluke, 2 Umers, and then for Life Bursts, 4 Extra, 4 Matcha Frap, 4 Servant, 2 Yuka, 2 Kagamecha, and 4 Mikos. Or 4 Miko fans. Notable cards, aside from the partner Signy Miko fan, we got Pond Turtle and Donna Dissonance as our notable cards. This deck doesn't open, it's the same as Yuki in that regards. It doesn't open a lot of holes. Yeah, you've got Musica, yeah, you've got Umer for opening holes, but for the most part, a lot of the deck's damage wants to come from double Lyric swings. Pond Turtles is just monomine. Who am I going to kid? It's Pond Turtle's monomine, except she also has the additional benefit of being a 5k as long as you have 2 or more cards in your hand than your opponent, which doesn't really, play well into her auto ability, since both you and your opponent are discarding in this regard. But I mean, sometimes you just have extra cards in your hand than your opponent. So some of the biggest strengths of this deck is you have discard across both turns, because if you know the text off of Miko fan, she gives your opponent a Miko Defense Squad, which is a token that says at the end of your opponent's turn, they have to discard a card. If they do, they lose the token. So the more Miko fans you have on board, the more your opponent's going to have to discard at the end of their turn. And if they can't pay the cost, those tokens will persist. So if they somehow manage to ever end up with more than 0 cards in their hand at the end of their turn, they have to discard down, which again plays really nicely into the double Lyric swing setup that you want to do with Donna Dissona. because if your opponent has no hand, they have no servants, right? Right. So you have that, and you have probably the most defensive burst lineup in the set between extras and Miko fans. Because extras, your opponent has to discard 3 on a target Signy or Larig swing. So against multi Larig swing decks, this is detrimental because they now have to discard 3 cards, or otherwise the attack just gets negated, so nothing happens. And then Miko fan, her burst is just to freeze target Larig on the opponent's field. Sometimes your opponent just won't swing because so Miko fan is effectively a servant burst. It's either a that turn servant burst or it's a next turn servant burst. And if you have a servant in hand after triggering this, it's fun. Yeah, sometimes you don't end up in that perfect scenario of basically being able to get 2 free guards out of 1 burst. Well, a free guard out of 1 burst, but in some cases, like, it does matter because your opponent might not even swing against that Miko burst. So some weaknesses of the deck is you can over discard yourself. The only ways you have to gain hand here, you have your 2 assists. Yuka, and Madoka to get some hand size. Probably have to time those a little bit differently, and you do have unknown memory to draw 2, enter 2. So you have to like time these out with your discards, but it's entirely possible you can over discard yourself and run out of playables very fast, because outside of your rig deck, you don't have any other way of regaining your hand here. And the other weakness being your grow costs compete with your piece costs. This list is familiar to mine, so this is coming from experience on how this deck likes to play. I think between my list and this list is I don't run the Umar Dissonas, I run 4 Novas instead. Sometimes I just don't have the enter for Summer Live Blues, or there have been many times that I just don't have the enter to grow into my Miko 3. There are only 14 blue cards in here, 18 blue cards in here, not counting the servants, and even though, like, that seems like a lot, you have to remember that you are starting your discard plan as early as level 1, and those pond turtles might not be, like, your level 1s might not be enough if you're paying for extras, like, super early, unless you hold on to your extras for late games. A lot of time, extras just end up being my discard fodder for pond turtle instead of actually using extra as a spell. And naturally, you don't want to discard your Mikos unless you have maybe a Kaga Mecha in hand to be able to bring them back if you have the black in your enter zone. So you want to hold on to those, so you aren't really charging a lot of black throughout the game. You're not intercharging a lot of blue throughout the game. You're intercharging literally everything else but blue. So that's like one little issue I have with the deck. Otherwise, I wouldn't change much of this list. This list in its own is, like I said, this list in its own is really close to what I run currently, and I've been enjoying it when the deck works. Naturally, there's probably still some tweaks that I need to do to it, but it probably can't make those tweaks until next set when we get more Dissona support, since there's only very little what we can run with here. So that's it for Miko. On to Mel this time. We've got 4 Firecracker, 4 Wobble, 2 Guillotines, 4 Ivies, 3 Bang Dissonas, and 4 Orzils, or 3 Orzils for non-burst. Burst, we got 3 Opening Signal, 3 Emergence, 3 Pilabis, 4 Servants, 3 Kagamecha, and 4 BFF Dissonas. So notable cards for this one are BFF Dissona, naturally. Her partner Signy is probably the biggest defense-wise in Dissona meta can sit at 20k for a very long time. Can be as much as 25k on offense. Sits 20 on defense, because it's optional to put cards from under her into your enter zone, so you can hold on to that as long as possible. We have Bang Dissona. Bang Dissona is probably one of the best level 3s, but it especially so shines in this deck here, being a super defensive option, because so long as you have 3 Dissona, she has Shadow level 3 or higher Signy, which you do know from a lot of things here is, or a lot of decks we've gone over so far, is their level 3s are the powerhouses. Like, for example, Hanyo, this card is really good because it beats the threshold of opening signal, and any other targeted effects cannot like target her at all. Which does come up against Yuzuki in a sense, but or any effects that look for like 10k or more. Does not protect against herself, unfortunately. And then last being Wawolf. You can convert a lot of your extra enter that you're going to gain off of using Emergence and Ivies into level 1 Lancers. So some of the strengths to this deck is it has the best defensive board in Dissona through BFF and Bang. I've covered this with their with the notable cards. Through BFF and Bang, best defensive board in Dissona. And the deck always has at least a +1 in damage because of Mel's beginning of turn auto. It's similar to Hanyo, except not as fast. Except not as fast as Hanyo is between Assassin and Double Crush. This is just 5k, and then you can also give that pay 2 and also give that Signy S Lancer. But it does mean you don't have to worry about opening lanes on a turn your opponent does not have has 0 life cloth, because S Lancer is a way to kill. Since it can deal the last damage if your opponent has no life cloth after you vanish a Signy. So some weaknesses of the deck, though, there are no coin outlets except for BFF Dissona. So Mel is cursed with coins, and I say cursed here because the only like coin outlet in the deck is BFF Dissona, and you only get that once because BFF Dissona burns all 5 coins as an action just to get Lancer, not S Lancer, Lancer. So like there isn't really anything meaningful to use the coins on, so coins just end up a lot of times just being like a dead resource, or you just burn the coins to bait an assist or something like that. And your OPG competes with Grows for your defensive assists. We see that with, like, we have MC Lion that costs at least 5 enter if you want to do all 3 nodes. Doesn't really so much compete with Machina. Machina is relatively cheap in that regard. But you have to pay 3 for her OPG, and unless you are high rolling it with constantly getting IVs and emergences, and your opponent is clearing your board constantly, which might be an issue considering how well the defensive capabilities of this deck are. You might not have enough enter to be able to both OPG and then be able to use a defensive assist in the same turn. I don't think you're going to end up in a situation where that actually becomes an issue, but it could come up. Other than that, Mel is the one Signy one Rig I have not messed with yet as of recording. I did plan on building her at some point and trying it out, but for the most part, on paper though, this list does seem pretty solid. So I really can't speak much of to what I would change at this point in that regard. If anything, I would probably try to put in more white, potentially. White does have some pretty good options for the deck as well. I think Donna would be a strong pick for this deck, because if you're not burning the enter for S-Lancer on Mel's auto, you could instead use that enter for a second Lurig attack. And then last but not least, I want to move on here to Tama. So Tama's list: 2 Firecrackers, 4 Pond Turtles, 4 Musica, 4 Ivy, 1 Hanare, 2 Alos, 1 Umer, 2 Rickshaw for non-burst cards. Burst, we've got a 5-4 of lineup between Opening Signal, Extra, Servants, Kago Mechas, and Destros. This is, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, my memory is failing me. I know I just covered over a lot of these. I think this is probably the most ambitious list in terms of like cards in general. I think it's the only list that has one-ofs. Yeah, it's the only list that has one-ofs out of all their sample lists. But that's fine considering what Tama does. So notable cards are Destro Dissona, Kago Mecha Dissona, and Rickshaw Dissona. Rickshaw is a very interesting pick here, but when you combo that into what Tama's once per game and Kago Mecha does, Rickshaw is actually a pretty interesting pick here. So Destro pairs really nice with Destro does pair really nicely with Tama, because Tama has a once per turn ability. You can just pay 2 black to trash a signal on your opponent's field. Destro plays, interestingly enough, into that theme very well. It's a polar op. It's a similar-esque thing to what Yuki does. Because Destro, when she enters, you pick something on your opponent's field if you have a Tama, and if that becomes vanished this turn, instead it's sent to trash, so you can actually attack into your opponent's lanes and not care once you hit level 3. Kagamecha helps with consistency. With the level 3s in this deck, you want to see them often. So Kagamecha being able to just bring out any of the level 3s that you want from trash is extremely strong as well. Does give you access to Rickshaw a lot easier, so you can just play a level 1, throw the Rickshaw on top of that from trash. Rickshaw is probably like one of the best level 3s outside of, like, you know, Destro, outside of like Destro and Umer in this deck, because it's much better. It's a much better opening signal in that case. So, and with that, that is our other notable card. Rise, beginning of attack phase, you can pay a red to vanish a Signy on your opponent's field with the same level as the Signy underneath this. So with Kagamecha or Tama's once per game, you put this over a level like 3 or something, a level 3 or a level 2, easy to get rid of, and you use your other cards for the other 2, and is also 12k body, and is the only other 12k body outside of Alos. So some of the strengths of this deck is it doesn't care about discard, and it doesn't care about enter burn once you get level 3 for enter burn. Discard, both of these are like its best strengths at level 3. It doesn't care at all about either, because Tama's once per game can summon 3 out. Kagamecha can recur stuff out of your trash anyways. But the biggest weakness of this list in particular is its low black count may cause issues before level 3. And I know I said this about Miko Miko, and Miko Miko had almost half of its deck as blue. This list that Takaratomi put out only has 12 black outside of Servants, and that could actually cause issues. Because while at level 3, Tama turns all Signy on your field and your enter zone into black, so enter costs normally don't care at that point. You still need to grow to level 3, right? So there's just a lot of competing stuff in here. You have there are the Ivies to try and help with maybe trying to enter charge more, so you don't have to worry about hitting that grow lock, but it's still like a big possibility to hit that grow lock here. Other than that, I think this list is a little too ambitious, running a solid lineup of 4 different colors. I would probably personally trim out the opening signals. I would honestly just trim out the opening signals and the rickshaw. Yes, I know rickshaw. I said rickshaw was a notable card. I don't like red outside of the firecracker in this list that I see here. And if you're gonna trim out the opening signals, you might as well swap out the rickshaws again. You could put in 2 more firecrackers and then use the other 4 slots that you open up with opening signal for emergence, for example, and just go a blue, green, black route here instead. The pieces are fine. Azure Black Gaia is amazing in this case. It adds more to the whole like graveyard recursion thing that Tama wants to do. But other than that little change, I wouldn't do many other changes to itself. Like Dissonance is a very straightforward meta, so it's like really hard to suggest changes to some of these decks, because some of these decks are very cookie cutter across themselves. Like I think almost every single list ran Firecracker, for example, except for Miko Miko. No, Miko Miko and Yuki didn't use Firecracker, but like since now we're in no colors, every single list could almost be the exact same, and you could run any center that you want, which is one great thing about Dissonance. But at the same time, this is one thing I don't like about Dissonance, but I'm not here to rant about that. That could be a topic for another day. But that's going to be all that we have here. I rambled on a little too long about some of these decks, but as always, everybody, thank you for watching and listening. I should have gameplay on the sample decks with fellow channel friend, basically my partner in crime sometimes on this stuff, Zombie. We should have gameplay on these sample decks to show a little bit more of them in action within the next couple of weeks, as well as potential videos on what we would do changes wise to each of these decks, so we can expand more on these sample decks and their strengths and weaknesses in those videos. And I'll see about next week for the Japanese lists on sample lists, or just going over tournament results. Just let me know what you want to see in terms of coverage for the Japanese meta, because there is a lot of cool stuff that's coming on. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for listening. I will catch you guys in next week's video. Have a good day.